wondering if you can give people a little rundown as to what led to the action.
Thanks for having us on tonight. Yeah, I mean, you're right. As people who live in Durham or live in the Triangle know that, you know, Durham is not unique in having these memorials to the Confederates, the Confederate Army. Sometimes it's for specific generals like Robert E. Lee, but in Durham, the one right next to our county courthouse, our old county courthouse, where our county commissioners meet, and down the block from Black Wall Street, historic Black Wall Street, is a statue in honor of the boys who wore the gray, the Confederate soldiers statue monument. You know, in recent weeks, after this action, there's been people questioning, like, oh, well, who funded this? And, you know, when was this put up? But, yeah, for the most part, you know, your average townsperson knows that this has been here forever. That said, the resistance in Durham has also been there for quite a while, too. So, you know, it's important that folks know that this wasn't like, hey, we're bored, let's take down a statue. It was a political statement about the fact that white supremacy has no place in Durham, North Carolina. Not to say that the statue equals the only problem of white supremacy. It's the most visible. It's the tip of the iceberg. And the people in Durham, as you know, Mark, and as you're part of this community, are very invested in people's power, are very invested in uprooting systems of oppression that, you know, is crystallizing the fight against white supremacy. So we wanted to say something, do something in the wake of the events in Charlottesville, Virginia, which happened the weekend before on Saturday, August 12th. A woman, Heather Heyer, a counter-protester who was going up to say no to white nationalists, to the KKK, an anti-racist white woman, was actually murdered. Now, for those of us in the movement and social justice world, we knew about this, but this actually commanded the national stage. Many people across the country were very affected by this narrative and a little bit scared to recognize that the Trump administration had given leeway and given a stage for, you know, open white supremacist hatred and nationalism to be the rule of law. And also we're, you know, definitely upset that the police in Charlottesville did not do anything to stop, you know, the terror of white nationalists. So like many places in North Carolina, across the South, across the country, we had a vigil and a demonstration where the people of Durham showed up and kind of contextualized what this moment was, who the enemy was, what the strategy was. And, you know, it was a real show of solidarity, a real show of unity. We had, you know, old folks, young folks, people who were rooted in the Black community, in the Hayti of Durham, people who are white and anti-racist who had gone to Charlottesville and were witnesses and came back. And, you know, the narrative is that, you know, one person was at the crux of this, but the real thing is that we allowed the community a choice on what was going to be done about this visual symbol of white supremacy, and the community took a stand and took that statue down. So, you know, lots of conversations about property, about vandalism, but I think for so many people in the movement in Durham, it's really about what's next. It's not just about this hunk of metal. It's about, okay, now we have our eyes on the prize, which is looking at the system of white supremacy, and that is the real threat to the state, the sheriff, the police here. And there has been a political witch hunt and political retribution, you know, people having arrest warrants, showing up at somebody's job, you know, breaking into somebody's house, really trying to rattle us and shake us, not just about what happened that day, but about the fact that we do have our eyes on the prize, that we are more united than ever. You know, I'm here today with the Defend Durham Coalition, which has popped up a lot of different folks in solidarity, anti-racist activists who know that Durham made the news and are proud that we stood up to white supremacy, that we, you know, sent the Klan home on Friday that week when they wanted to squad up and show that they were upset. We have people who are calling the DA's office and flooding and saying, drop the charges. You know, we have a lot of work to do, but we are on the ground and we are running. And again, thank you so much for inviting me here to talk a little bit about the work that we're up to.
Oh, no problem at all. Glad to have you on the show, and definitely glad to let folks from around the country learn about what's happening, not just here in Durham, but throughout the country. Actually, last week we had a caller call us from Oklahoma, the Tulsa area, because they were going through some similar kind of things with their society, not just with the African-American community, but also with the Native American community, and they have now become a regular listener as well, so hopefully they may call in and give us a little bit more insight as they learn more about what's going on in Durham. But they definitely gave us a lot of insight as to the parallels, and of course we've heard of parallels, things going on not just here in Durham, but I believe there was some actions taken in places that people even know to be also a little bit on the racist side, even though they may be northern, because there have been actions in Boston and other places that have a little bit of racial tension and racial history as well, even though people try to differentiate between what happens in the South and what happens in the North. But systematic racism actually exists throughout the United States, and that rise of nationalism is definitely, we're seeing that particularly with this administration, but it's existed in other administrations as well. So one of the things that I'm sure that people would be wanting to know is, you mentioned it earlier, but I know that one of the earlier posts that I saw on Facebook was some of our leadership folks have actually had people come into their houses in terms of local law enforcement and seem to be fascinated by some of the literature that they have and want to make assumptions about what their politics are or how radical they are based on what they have in their collection of books and or newspapers and things of that nature. I remember that one of the leaders of the Durham Solidarity Center, I believe there was a book on Malcolm X and some other things that were in their collection that they wound up having pictures taken of. So I think folks are learning a lot about how deep the repression can go and things of that nature. So I just wondered if you could tell a little bit about, after the statue was taken down, what some of those things that happened as a response from law enforcement and from even some of the people out of the alt-right, if that's what they want to call themselves, because there have been threats placed on people and things of that nature. So we're definitely trying to keep an eye on people and ways to keep safe and things of that nature. So if you can just let folks know what some of the reactions have been.
Totally. And again, this is loan from Workers' World Party, the Durham branch. I think that we are, the response that we're receiving from law enforcement and, the white supremacists and neo-Nazis and vigilantes on the right is, in some ways really expected. When wherever and whenever there is resistance, there is bound to be repression because, as Eva mentioned earlier, we are showing, right, to our communities and also to the state and to the police and to the sheriff's department that we're much stronger together. And so at this point, there have been 8 folks arrested who are facing several charges. And actually, as I'm speaking now, folks are preparing to do jail support at the downtown jail because the sheriff's department has issued 3 more arrest warrants for folks allegedly who are a part of Monday's action. And they're really doing this to intimidate people and to instill fear in people and to try to isolate people, trying to strike up panic and paranoia so that folks are immobilized and don't get organized. But we know that these are classic tactics when we're dealing with a white supremacist state, and we saw that with COINTELPRO in the Black Liberation Movement and Civil Rights Movement of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We've seen that throughout history with the anti-war movement, and we've seen that very recently with the Black Lives Matter movement that sparked up after the police murder of Mike Brown, that they will target and come after organizers and leaders within our communities, and we believe that our strongest defense is solidarity and unity, and raising up the message that we're not going to stop until we smash white supremacy. Folks are clearly not going to stop until every statue that
commemorates, the Confederacy and commemorates white supremacy and racism comes down. And so in terms of, what folks are doing to keep safe, I think it's continuing to organize and convene as a community and lean in on each other and really identify the reality that very often our law enforcement, whether they work in direct collaboration or not, are carrying out, the agenda and the ideology of white supremacists. And so we're prepared to continue to organize and mobilize folks. And I will actually have to hop off of here shortly because we are, again, going to the jail soon for folks who are turning themselves in. But, one thing that we want to make sure that the Sheriff's Department knows here is that we're not going to be scared into submission.
Yeah, definitely not. And one of the things that I've been really proud about in Durham, I mean, it's existed in the past, but I think we're even seeing it more with what's going on this time around in terms of fighting against the different kinds of repressions that exist out there, is that there seems to be a lot of unity among folks. And I know that one of the tactics that folks have used for years is trying to divide people. So they try to, turn people that are black against white, the LGBT community against the religious community, and the different classes, like poor against middle class and things of that nature. But from what I'm seeing, both in the big rally that was held after the statue was taken down on that Friday and everything, and what I've seen on other actions as well, is that there's definitely unity across the board, that folks are not going to play the whole divide and conquer kind of game that a lot of times folks like to try to get folks involved in, because we all realize that the struggle is a struggle that incorporates a lot of different kind of people and a lot of different kind of struggles that exist out there. Because, they will try to divide people, trying to make not even fair parallels between, the civil rights struggle and the LGBT struggle and things of that nature as a dividing tactic. But a lot of times we don't seem to be wanting to fall into that game. So it's a good thing. And I'm just wondering if y'all were seeing that same kind of, noticing that same kind of habit that a lot of folks are being, one, that they're trying to do that division, and two, that a lot of folks are recognizing the errors of the past and not falling into that division as quickly.
Totally. Yeah, I think that especially in moments like this when things are intensifying at such a rapid rate in North Carolina and also across the South, that, one of the things that we're really a firm believer in is that the struggle changes our consciousness, right? When we are able to witness for ourselves exactly what it's going to take in order to tear down all of these systems of oppression, whether it be white supremacy or capitalism or sexism or homophobia, that it's really going to take all of us. And ultimately, at the end of the day, and it may sound cliche, but I think politically it is very true, and it has been true for what we've seen here in Durham in terms of folks coming out and supporting each other, is that we have a lot more in common than we are led to believe. That ultimately, at the end of the day, there are two sides. There is the side of white supremacy and oppression and capitalism and exploitation, and then there's the side of our folks, right, who are fighting for freedom and justice and liberation. And while there may be some moments that are very challenging or heartbreaking to deal with, we know that our side, the side of freedom fighters, historically and currently and well into the future will be weighted much heavier, will be much stronger so long as we come together. I think that there is always a current, right, of folks who do want to divide and conquer and draw wedges, but we know that at the end of the day that it's much more important for us to come together and build this fight together, because we're facing a common enemy for LGBTQ folks, for Black and brown people, for immigrants, undocumented folks, for women, for working class and poor people, for disabled people. We're facing a state and a government that is really repressive and harmful and does not have the interests of our communities in mind, and have more of the interests of politicians and profiteers who are running these big banks and these big corporations, and could really care less, right, whether or not people are able to survive their day to day.
Yeah, definitely. for those that are not that familiar, of course, I know you that very well from having been involved with the Solidarity Center and seeing you being very active in the struggles that we're having and everything. For those that are new to hearing about you, give folks a little history as to how you got into activism and things of that nature, because, like I said, I know a little bit of the story, but other folks like Dean and